Well, I want to welcome you to another in our occasional videos that we're calling The Essentials. It's the essentials to life and the practices of our faith. And each time we have one of these videos, we look at just a different theological concept. And this week, we're going to look at something called personal eschatology. Now, when dealing with eschatology, we look at two aspects. First, the individual eschatology, and then cosmic eschatology. Individual eschatology is the future of the individual. Cosmic eschatology is the future of all humankind. Today we're going to explore the individual side of this topic. Most of the time we avoid the concept of death. We avoid it talking about it. We avoid thinking about it. We maybe go to a wake or a visitation and you go in, you pay your respects, and then you kind of you hustle out to the hallway. Or as I remember as a child, my family, we went to a funeral of a great aunt, and all I remember about that visitation is we spent the entire time in the kitchen at the funeral home drinking coffee and eating cookies. So I'm not sure if we consciously avoided the concept, but we sure did distance ourselves from the main room of the funeral home. But y'all, what is death? Well, today we're discussing physical death. Ecclesiastes 12:7 tells us that death is the separation of the body from the spirit. Death is not the end of existence. Living and dying are not existence and non-existence. They are two different types of existing. We exist alive or we exist after our death. In addition to physical death, Scripture speaks of spiritual death and eternal death. Spiritual death is the inability to connect with spiritual things. It's a separation from God. Eternal death is forever separation from God. If we reach our physical death while still experiencing spiritual death, we will then forever experience eternal death, eternal separation from the Lord. But let's return to physical death for a second. Our question is physical death natural? Well, you say, of course it's natural. Everybody dies. Well, that means it's common or it's almost universal. But I'm asking, is it natural? Were humans created to die? Well, for our answer, we need to go to Genesis chapter 3. And I encourage you to go read the chapter yourself. And it appears that the plan for Adam and Eve was that they were not to face physical death. Death was the promise of eating of the forbidden tree. And upon eating of that tree, they were evicted from the garden, thus keeping them away from the tree of life. So Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:21, as a man came death, by a man has come also resurrection of the dead. So death resulted from disobedience. We call that disobedience sin. Well, it appears that Adam and Eve had the ability to die before the fall, but had they not sinned, they would have had access to the tree of life. So Millard Erickson puts it this way: they were created with contingent immorality and could have lived forever, but it was not promised that they would. So what are the effects of death, and why do we still die? Well, for the unbeliever, death is a curse. It is the point at which eternal separation from the Lord happens. For the believer, though, that curse is gone. Philippians chapter 1, verses 20 through 23, Paul says that he looks forward to the time where he can spend eternity with his Christ, with his Lord. And so for us, death is not just is not a separation. It is a unification, a reunification with the Lord. But still, why do we have to die? If it's such a fearful thing, why do we have to die? If physical death is simply a penalty of sin, and Christ took away my sin, then why do I have to face death? It is necessary for us then to distinguish between temporal consequences of sin and eternal consequences of sin. You see, Christ came and he died in my place. He took my payment for my sin, and he took care of the eternal consequences of sin. But the temporal consequences still remain. Our forgiveness and justification made it possible for us to live with Christ forever, but we still have to be human. And being human means that we are born, we grow, we struggle, we face uncertainty, and we face death. But we can face death without fear because of what Christ has done in our lives. Go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 15 with me and think on this. Death came in because of one man, because of sin. But Christ came and provides a resurrection from the dead. He came to heal our spiritual death so that we don't have to face eternal death, so that after our physical death, we can spend eternity with him. So I want to encourage you to think this week, think today on your standing with the Lord. Where are you with him? Have you let him solve your spiritual death problem so that you can spend eternity with him? So the question today is, what is personal eschatology? It's simply a fact of life. We will die, but it's what happens after that death that's important. It's important that we know now that we are spiritually dead, that Christ can save us, and as Christians, Christ has saved us from that spiritual death, and that he has made a way for us to live eternally with him. Well, thank you for spending a few minutes with me. I hope this helped out just a little bit. Thanks.